So if there's anything else probably in depth, he can probably fill you in on that. But I do want to give you the highlights of the year. It was a tough year. The results are not as wonderful as I would like to say that they are. City such as this, we're all experiencing the same types of things in the government. As we all know, our expenses are rising and our revenues are either staying constant or going down. So it was kind of a tough year. There's a lot of things that went on for the city. You issued new debt, which was for the street project we've all been talking about. And so that is going to be something that I think you guys are going to need to continue to manage and look at your expenses and your revenue. But I do want to go ahead and report on the numbers for the year. On page 11, this represents the balance sheet of the city. It's broken down into two columns: governmental activities, which are primarily things like the police department, fire, ambulance, streets, and then the business type activities, which are the water and sewer fund for the city. And there's a total column, which is probably the easiest thing for us to look at. Your total assets for the city are a little over $4,900,000. If you look in the third column there, your liabilities are $2.9 million, leaving a difference which is equal to your total net assets of a little over $2 million, right at $2 million as a matter of fact. Now, we want that number to be positive, of course, that net assets number, because you want your assets to be greater than your liabilities. The situation for the city this year, there is a concern that I have that I do want to bring out here, is the fact that there is a portion of your net assets that are negative, and that's a total of $44,000 that are negative, which is a deficit balance. That's not a good situation. What has resulted here is that there are monies that you have to set aside that are for particular purposes, for the bond debt service, that your capital assets don't count, non-spendable monies. And those total numbers are what are shown here: invested in capital assets and restricted for particular purposes. And the difference becomes a negative number because operations were not what they needed to be this year. You'll see in just a second, and I'll show you how expenses exceeded your revenues by about $200,000 for the year. So it put us in a situation where it's a negative situation. Unrestricted is really the only monies that you've got to operate the city with. The other monies are already accounted for. They're already out there, and you've already bought assets with them, or you've already committed them for debt service. So this is a number that really needs to continue to be monitored as you move forward, and we want to get that number up. So how you do that is you keep your operations where you need them to be. You make some money as you move forward. Your revenues need to exceed your expenses. So that's a negative there that I wanted to make sure that y'all recognize because that is important. It's also something I'm required by government accounting standards to tell you that you have funds that have a deficit position, and so I have to do that. The next page, which goes landscape, is the income statement, if you will, for the city. I have to admit to you, the format is not of my liking, but this is a format the AICPA requires me to put it in. And so it's a little difficult to understand, but it starts out with your expenses on the left. And then as you move across the page and down the page, it shows your revenues. Excuse me. And then you get down to the far left, or excuse me, the far right, and again, you still have your government activities and you have your business type activities. And it shows you a change in your net assets. That would be your profit for the year. So what I'm looking at is about the fourth row from the bottom. And what we see is we have deficit position in both of those parts of the city. The $63,000 loss for the governmental funds, and a $142,000 loss for the water and sewer fund for the year. So a total of $205,000 loss for the year. Now, one of the things I do want to mention that we did during the audit, you'll see a prior period adjustment here that is made up because we did a pretty thorough review of our fixed assets that the city owns, and we took a look at the lives that we had assigned for those assets and to be depreciated. And quite honestly, there were a large number of assets that were being depreciated over far too long a life. Things like 80 years. And these were things that happened before either one of us came into being, but we did take a look at it. And we shortened up those lives. I know that's not cash money that you're concerned with, but it does hit your net assets, and it lowers your assets. And that number was $339,000 for the year. For actually inception to date. I didn't want to post it in the current year because I didn't want to distort earnings or the deficit as it is this year. But it's shown there, and that's what we did. The mayor and I and department heads looked over those things. So I think we have it where we want to see it. What you're going to see is the depreciation expense as we move forward from year to year, a little bit more than it has been because we shortened the lives. And that's one of the reasons that the increases in the water and sewer were just a little bit more than they had been in the past. Questions on any of those pages? I know that there's a lot of information there. I want to hit a couple of other things that I am required to hit, and those some things that I want to draw to your attention. On page 36, we are required only to present the general fund budget. The mayor and I talked about this today. One of the things that concerned me as I looked at the budgets for the upcoming year, the year you're currently in, is that none of your budgets reflected debt service payments, and they need to reflect those. So he is going to be working to bring an amendment for next month to look at that so that we have a complete and accurate picture of what those requirements are going to be.
Instead of putting the money in the general fund, we're going to allocate a line item to where we put so much of our indebtedness for each project each month into that, if y'all understand what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay? And we normally, and this is a change from the way Jesse did it. We normally would pull it out, like we owe Brandon, we'd pull it out and pay him. But now, we want to make sure, and this is a good budget technique for me. That way, if we put it in each month, we'll have it. We won't have to come back and say, we got to pull this much out of here, and in the general fund, it's not really what it said it is. All of these figures will be more accurate. Everybody understand? Okay.
I was going to go over that because that's one of the things that when we get into compliance, that's one of the things that I consider the city to be out of compliance with. I talked actually a little bit with Brandon about this because he holds, as Prosperity Bank, the bondholder for one of these notes. And what I felt like needs to happen, and it's very difficult to read some of these bond documents because they're in legal mumbo jumbo, but what I'm very clear about is the fact that there are certain accounts that have to be set up, and as the mayor is mentioning, excuse me, I didn't mean to hit you, but what we're going to do is make sure that we take the anticipated payments for debt each month and take those and actually put them and set them aside in a separate account so that we've got those monies set aside to make that debt payment. So what happens is as your tax revenues come in, you're going to see them being swooped over and set up in a restricted account so that they're there for paying debt. And that is actually a requirement. It's a good technique, but it's also a requirement of these new bonds that have been issued. So that's something that we didn't plan on doing in the budget, and we need to make that amendment. So the other thing, and I will stop with my presentation at that point. I mentioned this to the mayor because I think it's something that he needs to go ahead and maybe speak to the appropriate representatives about, and this is on page 37. We are also required to show funding progress on your pension for your anticipated retirees for your pension plan. And the numbers show that your pension plan is underfunded. It's underfunded by about $143,000.